bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vrandes, also known as Ricky Vrandes. Today we have returning guest, Scott Horton. The last time he was on, he came on to talk about his book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. I believe that's episode 144, so please go in the archives, check that out. Great conversation. He also is the managing director at the Libertarian Institute and host of AntiWar Radio, and he has his own podcast called The Scott Horton Show, which focuses on foreign policy, and it's one of my go-to podcasts in regards to current events and foreign policy. He always has the best researchers, authors, historians, just the greatest minds and people on there talking about what's going on in the world and all that stuff. And they're people from left, right. I know he's a managing director at the Libertarian Institute, but he has people like David Swanson on, who's been on my show, who's more to the left, and Greg Palast, who's more to the left, and he has libertarians on. It doesn't matter. As long as you're anti-war and you're trying to get out the truth on what's going on with foreign policy so people can know what's really going on, then he has you on. It's similar to my show. So if you're a fan of my show, you'll definitely be a fan of his show. So definitely check that out. Unfortunately, and this isn't the first time it's happened in the past, for some weird reason, when I went back into Pro Tools to do my typical adding the intro music and outro music and any editing that might be needed, the audio file was gone. I can't seem to retrieve it, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to get the show out because I want to make sure that this conversation is out while it's still relevant. So hopefully the quality is still good enough, because what I am going to use is this. I use a software that records our Skype conversation. Unfortunately, it records my webcam mic instead of my high quality mic, but from Scott's end, it actually doesn't sound that bad. So hopefully it's tolerable and you guys can still enjoy the conversation. And we talk about Venezuela, we talk about the Middle East, Latin America, all types of really relevant and interesting topics. So hopefully you guys listen and it's tolerable. If I do end up recovering the audio, because I have in the past found the audio, this isn't the first time it's happened, and I don't know why it happens. It's so weird, where I go in, I hit save, I get out of Pro Tools, and then eventually when I find time to go back to do some editing and do all my stuff, all of a sudden the only thing missing is the audio file I recorded, which is weird. But either way, hopefully, like I said, this is tolerable, and if I can recover the good quality audio file, I will re-upload this podcast with the better quality audio files. But like I said, hopefully this is tolerable. Also, our Patreon page, what I'm doing now for people who are supporting the show through Patreon is I'm basically giving you guys behind the curtain information. Usually podcasters, at least many of them that I listen to, they don't tell you who's going to be on the show until like the last second or until it's released. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to let you guys know the second I book a guest. I'll let you guys know. I'm sure sometimes I'm going to forgetting because I'll just get busy with life, but I'm going to do my best to kind of let you guys know when I have a show booked, when I have a idea for a show that I'm putting together. Maybe once I know who's on board, I'll keep you guys updated on that. I have one coming up right now in April that I'm getting some guests together to do kind of another roundtable discussion on a topic, and I can let you guys know who's going to be on that podcast and what the topic is and all that stuff. So just kind of get you guys all the information first. So hopefully that makes it a little bit more worth it. Just trying to give you more of a reason to support the show. I guess it's hard to ask. Well, I don't like asking people for money, first of all, but I know that I have thousands of listeners, and if people donated some, as little as $1 or $2 or whatever it may be, whatever you can afford, then it would really help with just supporting with the bandwidth and equipment and storage and all that stuff, and just justifying so much of my time going to booking guests and editing and uploading and all that required work that goes into getting these episodes out. So also the music that you hear in the beginning and in the end, and from the intro to the interview itself, all that music is Theory 6 music. It's Theory 6 is my solo project, which explains all my Instagram page accounts and Twitter accounts. Everything's RV Theory 6. So that music is available anywhere on our YouTube channel. You can just search Ripple Effect Podcast or look up RV Theory 6. In the show descriptions, I always put links to my music, my website, all the social media sites for my guests and their books or documentaries, anything that I can put there to make it easier for you to find. I do, so definitely check that out and make sure to subscribe to us, review us, and all that stuff. As you can tell, I don't like doing any of this. I just like talking and having these conversations and hopefully learning something. So, but this stuff needs to be said to make sure that people remember that, hey, even though we're putting this content out there for free, it does go a long way if you can support the show any way possible. And also it keeps us going. It keeps us going. And if you continue to want my podcast and other podcasters to continue, if you can support the show, please do. And if you can't support the show, like I always tell you guys, just share the show, do the reviewing and all that stuff, and that will help people find it. So that's it. As you can tell, like I said, that's my least enjoyable part of the podcast. So, but I got it out of the way. Now, time to go to the conversation. Like I said, hopefully you guys find it tolerable and you enjoyed the conversation. So, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. I'm glad to have you back. Having you back.
Thanks.
You're definitely probably one of the people I go to the most for what's going on in the world and foreign policy and all that stuff. I wanted to reconnect and kind of go over some of what's going on in the world, because I almost feel like it's overwhelming at times, and now more than ever we need people like yourself and I'm a big fan of James Corbett and just people who I feel like are sincere people who are anti-war, who really care about just trying to get the truth out there and let the public know what's really going on. And you're seeing issues with people there's so many conflicting opinions on this and that and what's really going on. And especially now with Trump, it's just, the way that I feel like the left kind of got tricked with Obama. And, I was one of them, because I think I was so anti the Iraqi war and so much of what Bush did that I just really, really deep in my heart wanted to believe that Obama was going to be different, which obviously he wasn't. And I think now the right's getting fooled with Trump. You constantly hear people justify all of his actions. Oh, there's a greater plan. It almost sounds religious to some sense.
Yeah, partisanship. It makes people just stupid and horrible and wrong. It really is unfortunate.
Yeah, and so in regards to what's going on, I guess the most common, topic or headline in foreign policy today has been the Venezuela thing. Have you looked into like the blackouts? I've been hearing conflicting opinions on was the U.S. involved? Were they not involved? I mean, I guess it would be a great way to try to push this coup that they're trying to put together. Do you see any evidence of them being involved with the blackouts and some of the other unrest that's going on in Venezuela at the moment?
No. However, I did run an article by Ted Snyder at AntiWar.com, which was all the reasons to believe that it's, a very realistic possibility and not just, some kind of crazy paranoia. And he cites a lot of different sources where they, have talked about in the past that this is something that they can do. This is part of the coup destabilization playbook, is to cause blackouts and that kind of thing. So it could be done with malware, right? It could be done with cyber attacks and, American military efforts or CIA efforts or not. I mean, and it's the kind of thing that's pretty much impossible to prove. You can believe in it if you want, or you can disbelieve. I think, the best we can do is, the fact of the matter is they've run that economy into the ground over there. So they've run their whole oil infrastructure into the ground. I'm sure the same is true with the rest of their, electric infrastructure and everything. Got massive price inflation and then price controls to try to limit that, which just disrupts every single thing and makes it where, cronies end up with the administration jobs in charge of things like dams, that need real expertise and professional kind of people running them and interested in them, rather than just somebody's brother-in-law or something. So, either narrative is perfectly realistic. And of course, even if it is the CIA or whoever behind it, they're playing on the fact that it sounds like perfectly believable that the Maduro regime is simply that incompetent, because they seem to be that incompetent on a lot of things. So, that's a long way of me saying, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's all right to sometimes say I don't know. I mean, that's kind of why I asked, because I wasn't sure either. I've heard kind of conflicting opinions, and I haven't seen any real evidence, but it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. And when somebody knows the history of U.S. foreign policy as well as you do, and I've done quite a bit of research myself, I mean, you do find the CIA will go to pretty crazy extents to try to overthrow a government and try to provoke unrest or whatnot.
Yeah, it's something like a blackout. That's child's play, right? That's just Tuesday for them.
Yeah, I mean, taking out. I mean, they've assassinated people. They've done so many crazy things in the past that it's like something like a blackout doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. It doesn't seem that crazy. I know I've brought it up to a few people. I'm like, hey, have you heard anything about it? And they're like, no, you think the CIA would do that? The U.S. government would? They're like, all those people with no water, no. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm like, how many people have we bombed and killed and or at least not?
We got sanctions on their state oil company right now. What's that other than a deliberate attempt to starve them out?
Yeah, well, you get people from the left who say that the reason why the country is so poor and struggling so much is because of the sanctions, and you get people from the right who say it's because of socialism. So it's like it's probably somewhere in between the answer, right?
Yeah, right. They're both right in their accusation against the other side.
Yeah,
that's really the deal. Although, one thing I'll say is I read a news report by a Russian journalist who was there, who was saying, well, there's a pretty big demonstration, say maybe even 10,000 people who are anti-government on one side of town, and another, pretty big rally of a pretty much equal size on the other side of town. But the rest of this whole city everybody's just going about their Saturday, man. This place is not on the brink of any kind of revolution at all.
Really?
There's no mass support for a putsch to get rid of the current guy, even if they don't like him for all their different myriad reasons to not like him. And was saying, he went to the government store, but he also went to a privately owned grocery store that was fully stocked with everything. And he didn't address specifically the price controls, but seemingly the price controls had been lifted. So it's not just hyperinflation that destroys your economy, which hyperinflation is really bad. Makes it impossible to save and destroys all kinds of capital and distorts all kinds of things. But when you put price controls on and you forbid retailers from raising their prices to keep up with inflation, essentially what you're doing is you're making it impossible for them to buy anything wholesale and resell it, because it costs more to buy wholesale than they're allowed to sell at retail. And so everything just shuts down. That's it. In fact, even as Bob Murphy points out, when you think about the 70s oil crisis, where they show you nightly news footage of American cars, everybody's driving these giant old Oldsmobiles and stuff, these gas guzzlers, and everybody's all lined up on the side of the road trying to get their tiny little ration of gasoline. And this is all blamed on the Saudis. And then there's this mythology that these Middle Eastern states hold this terrible power over us, that we're so dependent on their oil that we must please them at all times or else, and this kind of thing. Except That's not what was causing those shortages. It wasn't that they had raised their prices, which, hey, they were only keeping up with the inflation of the U.S. dollar. You can't blame them for that. That's not what it was. Nixon put on price controls. That was what did it. And that is, but nobody ever thinks of it that way. I mean, whenever I hear that discussed, I don't know about you, whenever I hear that discussed at all, it's never in context of this is an example of price controls don't work. This is an example of, the problem of American dependence on foreign energy supplies means all these sheiks just got us completely by the short ones, and we have to do whatever they say all the time and kill whoever they want and whatever. It's completely untrue.
Yeah, and some people blame it also on the Iranian Revolution, right? It had something to do with that, and the oil crisis of the 70s, and
that was later. That was later. This was Yeah. This was still under Nixon, was when you had the cars all lined up on the side of the road trying to get a gallon of gas.
Oh, that's right, 73. Yeah.
And it was Nixon, that commie Richard Nixon.
Yeah, it's amazing how people just you look at what's going on in Venezuela, and to bring up I brought up socialism. It's amazing how people are starting to use the communism, justification for invading countries again. You're starting to hear more and more of that. Where I've seen a couple people on Facebook get in debates and stuff like that, and it's like, oh well, they're communists or they're socialists, and it's like it reminds me of just reading back in the in the 70s, and when you're talking about invading all the Central American countries, and just just constantly using communism like it was some justification because you didn't like the way that they structured their economy, that it gave us the green light and justification to invade them and take down, a democratically elected president or whoever might be in power at that time. And it's almost like it's coming back again. It's to me, it just, I guess what bothers me is that so many people, they don't even understand what the word means. They don't know what socialism means. They don't know what, and it's, regardless if you're for or against it, but it really is just an ideology. It's just it's a philosophy, and to invade a country because you don't agree with their philosophy, it's like, who are we to say that we are the ones who know what the truth is, or how the way things should be, and everybody should be American like, and especially
when just pretend for the moment that Venezuela was just outright total Marxist dictatorship or whatever. Well, back in the days of the Cold War, the important part of that narrative wouldn't have just been really bad economics or something like that, or we disagree with their political beliefs about collectivism or something. But the idea was they were agents of the Kremlin. They were a base for the global communist menace based out of the USSR. That was the Russians' communist empire that ruled all of Eastern Europe all the way to halfway across Germany, and had client states all around the world. Now, they never really were bent on world revolution. Stalin killed Trotsky way back in whatever the hell it was, and they weren't really going to invade Western Europe or, really try to export communism to the whole world, certainly not by invading with the Red Army, but they supported various groups around. But so if you had asked the question in 1985, why do I care who's in charge in El Salvador? Then the answer would have been, oh, because it's the Kremlin, the Kremlin, the Kremlin, the Kremlin. So now the people that you're talking about, they're parroting these shallow talking points about the communist enemy when the entire basis of the argument that the Soviet Union is behind these groups and seeks to use them to destroy our advantage in the global Cold War is completely gone. The USSR ceased to exist, 30 years ago now. Right? It was 88 through 91. The whole Cold War and the whole USSR just unraveled and fell apart. And so how friggin' ridiculous is it to think that, just because somebody used the C word, that means then that the independence and sovereignty of whichever nation is hereby canceled and the U.S. can do whatever they want to them? I mean, if anything, we should absolutely stay out of it so that everything that is wrong with their economy, the Americans can clearly demonstrate to the world. Socialism is stupid. Look at this society. They've got oil more than they know what to do with, and they're still broke. How do you manage that? You know, but instead America intervenes and then takes the rap for their crisis. As you said, all the lefties say, no, it's Uncle Sam's fault. It's not socialism's fault. It's those stinking sanctions, which is, as you said, at least half true, right? That America is deliberately waging an economic war on this country. As Greg Palast said on my show, if America just did everything they could to kick the Canadians out of the international banking system and to put all these heavy sanctions on their oil industries and everything else, you think the Canadian dollar would collapse and they'd have hyperinflation? You're damn right. It's not all just monetary inflation that's driving the price inflation. It's the devaluing of their currency because they're being banned from international trade. And so, you know, we end up then becoming, the USA, the American empire, ends up then taking all the heat off of Maduro. And we saw this in the polls. His numbers went up. And his line that he's great at being a communist dictator and everything would be perfect if only America wasn't intervening sounds more true to more people. Because the USA ends up quite almost deliberately, certainly overtly, taking responsible for all the damage being done to the local economy there. So the whole thing is just completely ridiculous. And you know what it really is, of course? It's just making up excuses after the fact to support dear leader, whoever he is, whether it's Bush or Obama or Trump. He wants to do something. I'm a fan of this one. I'm not a fan of that one. But when this one wants to do something, then hi-ho, let's go, or you go fight, or whatever it is. And that's how they are. You know, that's how everybody is. So, I mean, just think, you know, again, just think of that. The global communist conspiracy, only without the USSR having existed for 30 years. But yeah, otherwise, it's a real threat.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and when you look at, you know, John Pillager, who I'm a huge fan of, I learned a lot about the U.S. foreign policy from his documentaries when I was younger, just researching and stuff. And it's amazing when you just see the same thing happen over and over again, you know, in Guatemala and Panama, you know, El Salvador, like you mentioned. I mean, so many of these places we've gotten involved. And again, like at one point, I guess you could make the argument that, you know, it's because of the Soviets are going to have control. They're trying to get control of this country or that country, or they're trying to basically do the same thing and put somebody in power that favors them and their policies. But, you know, now it doesn't, you know, you can't use that as a justification constantly, you know. And I mean, I guess in Korea, you could, in certain places like the Korean War, you know, we backed one side, they backed another side. But it is amazing when you look at history, how many conflicts, everything was it just seems to be a proxy war between the two superpowers.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, by the way, yeah, I didn't mean to imply that this was all perfectly legit during the days of the Cold War. I'm just trying to draw the comparison of how pale the argument is today compared to back then when that USSR actually existed. Whereas today, there's no Kremlin conspiracy to point at, certainly no communist one. But yeah, no, if you want to go back to the days of the Cold War when there was a USSR, virtually none of that was justified at all. I mean, if you want to say, for the sake of argument, leave out the crisis over Berlin and drawing the line halfway across Germany after the end of World War II and all that, we can get back to that if you want. But, you know, fighting the proxy wars in Korea and in Vietnam in order to, you know, supposedly contain the spread of communism by the Russians and the Chinese at that point. I mean, if you ask Madeleine Albright if the price is worth it, that's pretty, I mean, she, of course, would be for it. But, you know, there were 2 or 3 million Koreans killed in that war, as well as, you know, another 3 to 5 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians who were killed in that war. And then if you look at, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, maybe high hundreds of thousands killed by American-supported juntas in internal purges, like under Sukarno in Indonesia, or I guess Suharto after he overthrew Sukarno. These massive clampdowns in the 70s, just liquidating, and this has happened all over the world. where, right-wing governments supported by the U.S. just waged massive kind of internal purges and against leftists in the most horrific of ways. And in the excuse that, the Kremlin's behind everything in the world to justify it all, when almost always that's kind of the ruse. Almost always that's the bait and switch for American dominance. And in fact, Chalmers Johnson, do you know the story of Chalmers Johnson?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so he wrote the book Blowback, The Costs and Consequences of American Empire.
Yeah, I know.
And then he also wrote
title.
Sorrows of Empire and Nemesis. That was the trilogy. And he died back in, 2010 or 2012 or something. But he was he was a right-wing hawk at USC. He taught history, and he was a Cold War hawk. And then when the Cold War was over and the American empire did not come home, but in fact expanded, he said, well, wait a minute. The deal was that the empire was a defensive measure to protect freedom-loving people in the world from the expansion of Soviet communism. So now that the empire is still here, even though the Soviet empire is gone, I got to reassess and ask myself whether maybe I was wrong. So he went back. He didn't just study the current time. This is in the early 90s. But he went back and he looked at it and he saw that far more often than not, the specter of communism was being invoked to justify policies that had all different kinds of motivations. And you wouldn't be surprised to know bureaucratic and institutional and selfish public choice theory type motivations on the part of actors inside the United States government. To use the Soviet Union as their pretended menace that they're constantly trying to fight against, when in fact it's, mostly just a justification for what they want to do anyway. And then so he became a great anti-imperialist. And, Pat Buchanan and Jude Wanniski and Scott McConnell and I'm not really sure, but there's a whole group of conservatives, and Chalmers Johnson was among them, who they had been essentially Reaganite, right-wing, anti-Soviet hawks. What's not to like from their point of view? But once the Soviet Union was gone, they were kind of smart enough. They remembered what the deal was supposed to be. They were interested enough to know enough, but they didn't have vested interests in perpetuating the machine. They were more ideological. They were more, in fact, if you listen to Pat Buchanan or Chalmers Johnson or them they talk about the republic. They talk about saving a form of government where, it's representative, where the Bill of Rights comes first, where it's extremely limited and it's bound by the law and the Constitution and this kind of thing, and that you can't have that if you have a world empire. You're going to end up giving away all that you meant to conserve if you really go too far down this path. And that was kind of the whole paleo-conservative movement at the end of the Cold War, was sort of based around that. And not to compare Chalmers Johnson too closely with Pat Buchanan, because, Pat is quirky on some things and things that others not so much. But anyway, that was sort of the point of it. And I forgot what I was going to say about him really in the first place. But I'm glad I was able to talk about him for a second.
Yeah, well, you hit on so many interesting points. I mean, I think the thing about history in general is that we're always told one side of the story, which, we both know, and there's so many sides to the story. I mean, I learned so much from your podcast, from like just the relationships. I know you recently just relationships with India and Pakistan. A lot of people knew that they're all one country, and one. All the Muslims went to Pakistan and stuff like that. But people. The other, just why they dislike each other, all the English, controlling the country for so long, and just like all these little things that kind of make more sense of what's going on today. And that's the thing I love about history, is that it just conflicts today and what's going on in the world today make much more sense when you go back and you see how you got here, when you follow your steps backwards and you see, okay, well, what led us to here, to this spot, and to the present time. And, even with North Korea, like you said, like North Korea got demolished. I mean, we killed, I forget what percentage of the population, but it was like some ridiculous percentage of the population during that war. And we we wonder why they dislike us or why they don't trust us. And we're constantly talking about Korean propaganda on its own people, but a little bit of it's probably justified because they're a little worried about, like, hey, their own security. And you've talked about on your show, and I've talked about on my show. You look at the countries that listen to the U.S. and give up their nuclear weapons or kind of don't do what needs to be done to I guess preserve their country. Then you get taken over, and you end up becoming Libya. You end up being Iraq, So I think it's important to hear other sides of the story. I mean, it's kind of like Howard Zinn back in the day. His book was interesting to people because it wasn't from the American's perspective of American history. And I think that we constantly need to kind of read and listen to people telling us the same events, but told from other people's perspectives. And, I don't know if you ever watched like Hellstorm, the documentary. I think it's like Hellstorm, the real genocide of Nazi Germany, something like that. But it's about how the Soviets and the Americans or the Allies, how many of the just basically innocent Germans got killed and carpet bombed and murdered and all this stuff. And it's not justifying what Nazi Germany did, but it's showing that there is other perspectives, and there's.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Americans who ran that war admitted that they were war criminals, that if they had lost the war, they'd have been hanged just the same as they hanged the Japanese and the Nazis for what they had done.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it was completely equivalent. The British and the American war effort was not equivalent to what the Nazis had done. But when it comes to aerial bombing, I don't know. The Japanese might have a different point of view on that,
Which is another thing that I remember years ago when I started my podcast talking about how they knew that, there was a lot of historians are coming around saying that, or at least starting to admit that it's possible that Pearl Harbor could have been prevented and all this stuff. And people are like, oh, that sounds crazy, this and that. And even that now is starting to become more mainstream, and people are starting to I guess accept that perspective on history.
Well, that's mostly because of Robert Stinnett, who was in the Navy in the Pacific during World War II and had believed the official story all along until he told the story on my show a few times, how he kind of stumbled across the truth that the military had broken far more of the Japanese codes than they had ever admitted, and that the Japanese had not maintained silence, that they had been on the radio and had given away their positions and what they were doing and where they were going, and that the military absolutely knew, and that they had sent the intelligence off to, this is in his book, Day of Deceit, the truth about FDR and Pearl Harbor, and that Washington knew it, but then Washington withheld the data from the local commanders, Kimmel and Short. And the thing about it is that Stinnett doesn't have an axe to grind. He's not some kind of right-wing crank who hates FDR, like me. He instead is a proud Navy sailor from World War II, and to this day argues that FDR did the right thing, because baiting the Japanese into attacking us so that we could use that as an excuse to go to war in Europe was necessary to stop the Nazis. Simple as that. He don't care. He was the one who was lied into that war in the Pacific, and he don't care. It was worth it. It was the right thing, says the guy who uncovered all the data. And so that really went to show, not that he was 100%, omniscient scientist, perfect on everything, but it went to show that he was not coming from the point of view that he was trying to hang FDR out to dry. He was coming from the point of view of saying, you know what? We got to face the facts that history is history, and these are the facts, and we got to document them and tell the truth because that's important for its own sake, but that he still stood by FDR's decision to do it. And then when you read the book, it's all in there, man. There's no question. And including the 8-point plan of how to provoke Japan into attacking us first, written by an American naval officer named McCollum, who had been stationed in Japan in the 1920s and knew all about them, and just how to offend their honor enough where they'll feel like, and threaten their resources enough where they'll feel like they have no choice but to strike first. And in fact, the Secretary of War, Stimson, wrote in his diary, it's all about trying to figure out how to maneuver them into firing the first shot. That's all it's about. So yeah, proven case, man.
Yeah, well, what's amazing is that a lot of the stuff is in books. It's so much of this foreign policy strategies and what eventually ends up happening. I mean, a lot of these guys write about this stuff in books, and it's pretty out in the open. So it's like a lot of times when people call this stuff conspiracies or whatnot, or when they fall for the fact that, they're constantly selling us some just cause on why we're going there to save the population and to save the people for some human rights issues. It's pretty hilarious, because it's like, no, I mean, these people have been talking about this forever. I mean, you look at the Grand Chessboard by Brzezinski, and
Right.
Obviously PNAC with a New American Century and all that stuff. I mean, it's quite obvious that they have it's basically, we're working as an empire, and we're doing what empires do, and that's controlling resources and having influence all over the world. And but yet we're it's sold to the public, to the American citizens, that we're constantly doing things to help these people, or because of that people, or because of this and that, and people constantly keep falling for it. And I always say how, like, Game of Thrones and, like, House of Cards, that there were the same storylines. I mean, they're basically the same storylines taking place in different times. It's
well, there's a South Park that came out back in 2003 or 2004. The whole country's fighting about the war in Iraq. But the whole fight is about whether you like country or whether you like rock and roll. And so half the town is like, we like country and George Bush rules. We're going to go kick Saddam's ass and you're stupid. And blah, blah, blah. And then the other half of the town of South Park are all like, oh, we went to school and we're educated liberals and we're stuck up and we're, these pretentious know-it-alls, and we say that we shouldn't attack Iraq. We should give peace a chance, man, and listen to some classic rock instead of some country. And then so that essentially they don't talk about Iraq through the whole episode. They only talk just about whether you're country or rock and roll, whether you're right wing or whether you're left wing, just whose side you're on. And you know what? When it comes to Iraq, maybe, but when it comes to the rest of these wars, it's not even that. It's like country, rock and roll, and everyone is in on the war. And if you're against the war, it's just presumed that you don't know anything. You're against the war, what are you, some hippie? You're against the war, what are you, Jane Fonda? You're against the war, what, you think you know better than a bunch of generals in the Pentagon? And no one ever really is exposed to people who can confidently dispute what all is going on here in a way that, that they're willing to listen to, essentially. Everything is poison. If Michael Moore had never been born, think of how much better off the anti-war movement would be. Or if he would outright just be a warmonger and go, I like Hillary Clinton because she likes killing people, and then just make it clear that that guy is a warmonger and the anti-war people are the opposite of him. But instead, we all carry Michael Moore around on our back. And every time we want to talk to a right-winger and go, look, right-winger, this war, this stuff, it's just not true. They immediately think of him. Big, fat, gluttonous, communist, millionaire, hypocrite, piece of garbage, Hillary Clinton supporter. Enough said. And then, so how are they supposed to respect me when they think of him every time I say something? And so it's just, that's the cultural divide. It's all just the social psychology of the situation. If you're in with the dominant culture at the time and the dominant culture thinks this, then you think that too. If you say, no way, man, because I like hardcore punk rock from back when and whatever, and so I find myself as somewhat of an outsider and I don't go along with that, well, then there's a set of opinions for you too, but the difficult part is, like for me, of course, I know that I'm never going to get people to become all libertarians like I am. And that's not even I am an evangelical libertarian in a way, but essentially my mission one, of course, is always foreign policy, because I want to live in a free society right now in my lifetime. I'm not trying to get the Libertarian Party into power or some kind of thing. I'm trying to get the very worst stuff stopped. And so I got to appeal to everyone. I don't want to be against all the right and the left. I got to be, not necessarily for them, but like nice to them, try to get them to agree with me, try to lead and persuade them. And it's a real uphill battle when, again, everything is all just, and now more than ever, I guess, right? Everything is about identity. And in fact, what's funny is all of the identity politics, racial politics, and otherwise, but I guess especially racial politics, there's not too much room for anti-war stuff in there. It's all kind of like environmentalism. It's like this big distraction from anti-war stuff that the left wing should be interested in. And in fact, when it comes to anti-war stuff and all the racial identity and religious identity politics and stuff, the only real notable part of it is the fight over Zionism, because you're not allowed to say anything bad about anything any Jew ever did in any context, except that, Zionism and Judaism are sort of correlated. It's not a complete causation sort of a thing there, but there's issues to be had. And the whole situation in Israel, actual Israel, is a total system of apartheid and ethnic and racial supremacy, and entire castes of millions of people who are treated as though they have no natural human or political rights whatsoever. It's absolutely insane. It's like Mississippi in 1950 something. It's absolutely the worst crisis. But if you say anything about that here, then somehow now you're picking on a minority, when actually you're picking on a majority that's picking on a minority over there. But actually it's a 50-50 split, makes it even worse. But still, anyway. So there's a big fight about that on the left, about which identity politics are you supposed to identify with on the Palestine question. But other than that, the left is, and I shouldn't be too broad brushed, because in terms of writers, especially in terms of writers and journalists, there's a lot of great left-wing and progressive people who have stayed great on the wars this whole time. And, I don't know where I'd be without them. So I'm not trying to trash them, but I just mean kind of in the overall movement,
and you have
it seems like there's not too much room for that. If everything is all just about, this or that different color pitted against each other, ethnic groups pitted against each other in the United States, none of that really, perfectly aligns with foreign policy questions necessarily in any direction. You know what I mean? So it just kind of gets left out.
Yeah, I feel like being anti-war is the one topic that everybody can kind of come together on. You've had
definitely should be, yeah.
Yeah, it should be. And you've had David Swanson on your show. I've had him on this show. I'm a huge fan of his, and I have like people like yourself, people who when it comes down to other issues might be leaning more left or right or more libertarian or more liberal, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, I don't, I feel like being anti-war, like, how can you not be that? When you just say it out loud, it's like, well, if you're not anti-war, does it mean you're pro-war, or are you undecided? I mean, I don't understand how anybody could have any other stance. And if you do have that stance, then why isn't that a passionate topic? Why isn't that something that, you're constantly talking about and trying to just spark these conversations? I mean, I'm on this show. I don't always talk about foreign policy and what's going on in the world, but I always feel the need to every once in a while, because I don't want people to forget that while we're going on with our lives, and I'm doing shows about nutrition, or I'm doing shows about music or whatever it may be with musicians, then there's still wars going on, and there's still people dying, and there's still millions and billions of taxpayers' money being spent on ridiculous causes and on on bombs over Yemen and selling weapons to people who eventually end up being terrorists and all this other stuff. I mean, I don't want people to forget all that stuff's going on. And but even with the anti-war movement, I mean, you look at like Christopher Hitchens, for example. His book Trials of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is obviously a war criminal. If you don't know that, then you have to do some research and then really learn the history of Christopher Hitchens. And I mean, of Henry Kissinger. And, he's a war criminal. He's this awful person. But, and Christopher Hitchens wrote this book about, his foreign policy and his all over the world and all the horrors of the things that he did. And yet, when the Iraq War came around, he was for the Iraq War because of his dislike of what I think it seems like his dislike of religious people and thinking that, it was the root of all evil and all this awfulness in the world. Then even he, somebody who understood or seemed to understand a lot of foreign policy and historical events and kind of the bullshit that were sold to justify a lot of these historical events, even he fell for this trap of, oh yeah, well, Muslims are dangerous, so we have to go in Iraq, and so, when you see stuff like that happen, it's, and I'm sure you've had conversations with people where they seem pretty rational, pretty reasonable, and then for some reason you talk about a specific topic and you're like, holy shit, this person's completely brainwashed, or he's been tricked, and it's like that saying, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. Once somebody's been tricked, or once they've been convinced that, okay, this is for a just cause, or no, this is really why we're doing this, then it's hard to snap them out of it.
Yeah. And, of course, it wasn't just Hitchens. It was all the neocons hated Kissinger because he was the realist with the amoral foreign policy. And they said, no, we have to adopt a morality-based foreign policy, where we go find dragons to destroy in the name of goodness. We start wars now because we're so righteous that we can commit sins. That's what exceptional means, is that evil ain't evil when it's committed by us. Unlike that evil Henry Kissinger, who makes decisions based on the national interest spit. We care so much for the Iraqis, we're going to kill them all to set them straight. And Hitchens was absolutely as bad as any of them. And he could make a great case about what a devil Saddam Hussein was, but his case for a war against him was completely ridiculous. And he had to have known, what a hoax that was. And just looking in who he was aligning himself with in order to push that thing. It's completely crazy. But yeah, that happens all the time. And and I'm sure you've come across this too, but I've come to find that essentially everybody's a truther. People just make up whatever they want. I won an argument one time with somebody on Twitter who seemed to be an educated person who had a job at some council or think tank or some kind of thing. And it was about the coup in Ukraine and how America had helped to do it. And then when I proved that, all of a sudden she went completely insane and started talking about, yeah, but that could have been faked by someone and all of these things. And immediately, in other words, turning all reality around, where now she believes whatever the hell she wants to believe, and she's going to cherry pick what she likes and disregard the rest in order to make it her case. She went from a rational person when she thought she was right still to a complete conspiracy kook the moment that I had her on the facts. And I had a guy across the street who he moved away, so I'm not trashing him too bad. But he's a nice guy, man. He was actually helping me with my air conditioner, which was all, broken on the 4th of July. And so he was a really nice guy and doing a real nice thing for me. And he just started talking about how anyone who ever gets caught with cocaine should be immediately executed. And that's what will solve the war on drugs and I'm 99% sure I'm remembering this right, dude, that he was saying beheadings. That's the deal. You get caught with cocaine once, we put you in jail for 15 years. You get caught with cocaine twice, we cut your head off. That'll teach you, and that'll win the war on drugs. And so then I'm saying things to him like, yeah, but won't that drive the price of cocaine up real high? And then just guarantee that the worst criminals of all will take control of those markets? Right? Come on, think about it, right? Prices and stuff are things. And yeah, no way, man. He already had been decided on this. He might have decided on this when he was 14. Whatever. This is his answer to the drug problem. And in fact, it was funny because he said, if people want to smoke pot, I don't care at all about that. But if you do cocaine, you should be executed. And just simple as that. And I'm like, yeah, but you're talking about moms and dads and people. You're talking about killing them. This is crazy. How is that not crazy? And you hear people too say, well, we ought to just turn the whole Middle East to glass and just go over there with them H-bombs. And on one hand, you can say okay, you write that off. They know they're not in charge. They're just talking smack. And they're not really, it's not up to them whether to kill every single person on the Arabian Peninsula. But then again, if Donald Trump started dropping H-bombs, they would say, yeah, that's what I always said, turn them to glass and then steal their gas. And that the average guy really is just as bad as the worst cop or the worst CIA spy. They really are.
Yeah, well, I just don't think that people really think this shit out. Right,
they can't be bothered to. It's the same as kicking over an ant pile. Dropping a nuke on Nagasaki is the same as pouring gasoline on ants when you're 14.
It is. I mean, we're so detached from it. I mean, I think that's a huge issue too. It's just people are so, I've talked to people about this and people have disagreed with me, but I'm like, there should be more videos of war, of dead bodies, of all that. I mean, we should constantly be reminded. And this is just my opinion. I could be, maybe in 6 months I'll rethink this. But as of right now, I mean, I've thought like this for a while, where I think that it would probably do some good if people could stop being detached from what's going on in the world and see the dead body. I mean, remember when that picture of that little boy who that Syrian boy who was washed up to sea, and I'm a father of two, and two little ones, and that broke my fucking heart, man, and it pulled at my emotions in
And
ways
ironically, of course, that was war propaganda used to try to demonize Bashar al-Assad when it turned out he was fleeing from American-supported terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's funny that you say that, because I actually forgot that point, that they were actually using it to justify going into Syria.
Killing more people.
This is what people need to see. People need to see that this is what war looks like. This is what unrest looks like. This is what conflicts look like. You look at Yemen's barely ever talked about in the news. You look at just what's Libya, never talked about. It's just like we just leave these places a fucking mess, and there's all this unrest there, and yet we just go on with our lives. And I think if people saw more of the bloodshed, more of the families looking for shelter, looking for places to places to live, whatever it may be, it's I think we would realize that it's not an issue that we can ignore, or at least not an issue that we should ignore, because I think we can ignore it, because I think most people do. They just go on with their everyday lives. They don't think about it. It's like, I still go to the gym. I still pick up my kids. I still cut the grass. I do everything the same way, regardless what war we're in. And it's easy to do that when you're not getting these reminders, these constant reminders that, like, look what's going on. And not just that, look what's going on with our tax money. Every person who lives and works in America is some way contributing to this nonsense, and we should have a say in that. And so that type of stuff just drives me crazy, because so many times I get in conversations with people about foreign policy, and they just poo-poo it, like, well, yeah, whatever. You could just tell they're not that interested. And and it drives me nuts, because it's like, why aren't you interested? Like, I understand, like, okay, our roads being paved and having good schools and all that stuff, is important, and that's what your focus is. But there's other people in the world that are dying, and other people in the world who are getting bombed, and they're not any different than we are. And I had some years ago, I had Mariana Van Zeller on. She's this journalist. She's done a bunch of stuff like Oxycontin Express and a bunch of documentaries. And she had this show called Breaking Borders. I don't know if it was on Nat Geo or if it was on Discovery Channel. It was one of the two. And she would get people from two sides of a conflict. So she would get like a Texan who hates Mexicans, and a Mexican who believes in immigration, and or believes in Mexicans coming to the U.S. So they would do that. They got they did the same thing in Palestine. They did the same thing. I forget what other spots all over the world. And she would go travel these places with a cook, this really famous cook, and he would create this beautiful dinner, and they would try to get people from two sides of these arguments, and they'd say, hey, all we're going to do, we're just getting you together for this beautiful dinner. We're going to prepare for you. There's no strings attached. All you have to do is enjoy this beautiful dinner that we have this amazing chef that's going to create for us, and just sit across from one another. And it's amazing how, food, and then just sitting there, and especially when they weren't talking about the issue at first, when they were talking about anything else, everybody got along. Everybody got along. People, realized that, like, this person sitting across from me isn't that different. When you can actually put a face to these other type of people that you think are so different than you, and you actually put a face to them, and you can ask them questions, and you can talk to them, and you realize, like, oh, they like music like I do, or they love their family just like I do, and they just want a safe environment and a safe place to grow up in, and just be free to do the things they enjoy just like I do. Then your perspective changes. And I think if if you're around other people from other countries, and I for some reason I was born in Portugal. I came to America when I was young, but I just happen to be attracted to a lot of other foreigners, and so I have a lot of foreigner friends from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, from South America, and we all have so much in common. I mean, we can all talk about soccer. We all talk about music. We enjoy community and eating together and all this stuff. So for me, when we're talking about just bombing this country or getting involved in Venezuela or getting involved in wherever, it's like I just see people. I don't see religion. I don't see ideologies. I don't see skin color. I just see those are human beings that have families and loved ones that are and that's the thing. We've in America, because we live in such secure lifestyles where for the most part we're safe to go to the mall, if anybody still goes to the mall, go to the grocery store, do our errands, and we feel like, okay, we're fine. We don't know what it's like to live in one of these countries where you're hearing gunshots or bombs or there's American drones flying over your head. It's just, yeah. I mean, I probably should have had a question at the end of that rant. Like usual, I just go on for a while because
no, it's okay. I'll just say I totally endorse that. I mean, in my experience, I mean, I guess I judge the quality of a man's soul by how good he is at skateboarding. And so, race and ethnic and religious identity ain't got a damn thing to do with how good you are at skateboarding. And every kind of so-called minority has members who are way better than me. So what does that tell you? I don't know. I endorse everything you say there. I think all this racism stuff and all the essentially – I think the word racist is used too much because it's really a separate definition from prejudice. I think people should use racial prejudice and whatever ethnic and religious type prejudice against each other more often because it's a different kind of a definition. Think about just sort of being a jerk and assuming the worst about people you don't know and that kind of thing. Whereas to be an actual racist, like if those suffixes and things mean anything, then it's, all about that means you support a program of discrimination against someone and enforcing racial hierarchies and that kind of thing, which I'm not saying doesn't exist. I'm just saying it's a separate kind of issue.
Yeah, that's
in a way. One tends to lead to the other. They're obviously related, but they're not the same as all. But but no, I totally agree with that. And I think, if you have that kind of moral imagination for a minute to say, what, maybe you don't have to be Jane Fonda, the commie hippie weirdo trader who sat on the anti-aircraft gun. Maybe you could just be me and then also consider the value of the human life of a Yemeni baby and whether it really is okay or not to kill her just because it's government employees killing her. I mean, that's a pretty lousy loophole. As long as you're wearing green, as long as you're doing what a bunch of lawyers and politicians say, you can kill whoever they tell you to kill. That doesn't really sound right, does it? Just because they taught you that before, that kind of thing. And then also I just want to add one more thing real quick, which is, we're talking about the most extreme levels of violence here. We're not talking about like an old Western where bang and then the guy clutches his chest and there's not even a blood packet and he just kind of peacefully falls down dead on the ground and that's it. We're talking about people's bodies torn into little pieces and oftentimes dying very slowly and in the most horrific circumstances that you couldn't even imagine, beyond the worst horror movie you could think of. The kind of things that the bombs that our government drops, the artillery shells, the rifles, and the rocket-propelled grenades and everything else, you're talking about absolute barbarianism. And the way they sell us on all this stuff when we're kids is that one day you might have to wear olive green to go defeat the Nazi Wehrmacht out in the field somewhere, where every person you kill is also going to be wearing green and representing the other side, the bad guys, and they'll all be combatants and they'll all be fair game, right? But that's not how any of our wars are at all. You're much more likely to napalm a village full of innocent people. And, you don't have to take it from me. A lot of soldiers come back and go, yeah, it ain't like in the commercials. The Marine Corps commercials, you wear your dress uniform and prance around with a sword all day. Is that what it's like to be in the Marines, you think? prance around with a sword and be respected by people who never respected you before? Is that what you think it's really about? Come on. I don't know. But yeah, so and look, you mentioned Yemen. Yemen is a genocide. What do you call it when any country deliberately inflicts a famine on another country? That's a genocide. And that's what our country, the most powerful country in the history of the world, is doing to Yemen, the poorest country, the weakest country, just like we've done to Somalia for the last 13 years across the straits there. It's genocide. It's mass murder. It's the kind of thing where if anyone else was doing it, Christopher Hitchens would say we have to let George Bush start a war against him. But it's us. And why should that be so hard to fathom? You know what? Some of the guys on your favorite football team are rapists. You know that. Maybe you still like the team, but you don't have to sit there and pretend you don't know that these guys, some of them, get into trouble. Oh, yeah? Well, guess what? George Bush doesn't make the best decisions all the time. That breaks your entire spirit to hear that. I mean, come on, man. I don't know. I'm sick of this. I'm arguing with, not you, but the general American public here are, and especially the hawks. They retreat from being the toughest guys in the world to a bunch of little children that you can't ever offend. And that to disagree with their policy means you hate eagles, and you hate flags, and you hate army specialists. What a bunch of garbage.
Well, yeah, and it's amazing how when you start talking about foreign policy in the manner that we do, you immediately get. I mean, I've had people just tell me, "Well, why don't you go back to Portugal if you hate America?" I'm like, I don't hate America. I hate America's foreign policy, and I hate. I mean, the government doesn't represent the people. There's people like you and I who live in this country, and many other people who don't agree with what the government does. It's not like the government is in conflicts representing what the American public wants, because the American public doesn't know what the fuck's going on in Yemen. The American public doesn't know what's going on in Syria, and why we're getting, or why we want to get involved or whatnot. I mean, they don't know what's going on in a lot of these conflicts. I mean, we're just sold bullshit, and then we can start leading towards a way that they want us to lean. I mean, but to think like, okay, if I'm speaking openly about disliking, some of what we've done all over the world, then and then also you get the thing like, oh, people start saying, well, you have to go, basically just defending that we have to be the police of the world, and sometimes we are going to make mistakes. They just make it out to be like, oh, sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes it doesn't turn out well. Kind of like the Sam Harris type of debate. And there's a great conversation between Dan Carlin, which I'm sure you're familiar with from Hardcore History, and Sam Harris.
Yes.
Some years ago. I don't know if you ever heard them, the interview they did together, but it was really good because it was funny because nobody really talked about it and it didn't really get that much attention. But I found it really fascinating because, as you know, Sam Harris, similar to Christopher Hitchens, thinks that any country that's religious and especially if you're Muslim, it kind of, that's your justification to get involved and push our beliefs onto them and our morals. And Dan Carlin was, from a historical perspective and not having a race and a horse in regards to foreign policy, I think he's pretty neutral. He's not lefty or righty, or at least he doesn't come off that way. He was talking about, historically, you can use nationalism, you can use so many different things to basically create the same issue. Okay, so you're saying religion is what's causing terrorist attacks and all this stuff, but you can also say nationalism, or you look at the Nazis, they or whatever it may be. The point is, throughout history, there's been plenty of cases where you had a group of people, who disliked other people for other reasons than religion. And it was really interesting because Sam Harris, he likes to believe that he's this very unbiased person who doesn't have a opinion or some set, or that he's open to debate and have his ideas challenged. But when he has well thought out ideas, but the problem about those well thought out ideas is that they don't change. Like and people like him who, they truly believe that, like, the U.S. is like the gold standard of where every country wants to be, and we are only helping them by making them into us. And I think Dan Carlin said I think they were talking about I forget what you probably know, but not to any disrespect, but I forget what, and I don't want to get it wrong. I forget what it's called. The thing that the women wear over their heads, the burqas. And Dan and Sam Harris is talking about basically saving these women of or Sam Harris is talking about saving these women from wearing these burqas, that they wouldn't want to wear them, and we could save them from they could have more freedoms and all this stuff. And then Dan Carlin makes a really good point. He's like, what if they want to wear them? Who are you to say that they don't want to dress like that? Who are you to say that they don't they don't like the lifestyle that they have? And
or more realistically, who are you to say that they're better off dead than wearing one of those things? Because that's what we're really talking about, is killing these women to death so that they don't have to wear their stupid head veil anymore.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
And it's funny too, because you talk about, Sam Harris, I really don't pay much attention to that guy, but he sounds like a religious nut. Oh yeah, the U.S. government, despite all evidence, is really good at what it does, helping people in other countries. Really? Give me a break, dude. That's stupid. I feel like not even dignifying it, And honestly, I'm an atheist, but also I kind of left behind the novelty of being an atheist in 9th grade. And I think that people who are like, oh, look at me at how rational I am, that I don't believe in ancient Hebrew mythology. Like, yeah, good for you. Welcome to, I don't know, the modern era at all. Okay, fine. But that doesn't impress me one bit. And in fact, going around and picking on people who have religious beliefs for being so naive or so gullible or so whatever it is that they would go along with these things is far worse than being one of those gullible people who goes along, to me. And a lot of people, I think it was the great Doug Stanhope, the comedian, who said, hey, whatever gets you through the day, right? It's just, a question of inflicting that stuff on other people is a separate question. But to have like a grudge against religious people in a way where like it's supposed to be really impressive that this guy can debunk people's faith, which is not really up for debunking, is it? It's just stupid to me. And of course, who does he never pick on? The Israelis, who claim that a God that they mostly otherwise don't believe in, the Ashkenazi ruling class of Israel anyway, are mostly a bunch of secular reform type Jews who don't even believe in God, but they believe he gave them these other people's land. And that then also, and they have that they can do whatever they want with these Palestinians from now on too. And how's that? But he doesn't ever attack them. Oh, because they're facing down the demon hordes of orcs from Mordor with their terrible Muslim religion. What garbage! And never mind, a fifth of them are Christians. I bet Sam Harris doesn't mention that to his audience. They're like, oh, by the way, yeah, they're all terrible and everything, but 1/5 of the Palestinians being mercilessly persecuted by the Israelis here are Christians, just like you claim to be. But he doesn't ever mention that because he knows that people would say, really? Oh, I thought the Israelis were only picking on a bunch of Muslims. So let's see, if an Arab is a Christian, does that make him at least half of a human being? It just might, in the mind of an American. And so got to keep that part of the narrative on the down low. I don't respect that at all. It's like the same thing with Bill Maher. I saw a thing where Bill Maher was denouncing the political correctness that we can't criticize Ilhan Omar because she's a black woman, refugee, blah, 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 which it's true that she's the poster child for every intersectional, at least, she's not gay, I guess, but otherwise she's very intersectional, I guess. But of course, what's he crying about? That she said something about Israel. That she said something about the Israel lobby. And so what is he doing other than running to a safe space and screaming and crying like a little crybaby that somebody said anything? She didn't even use the J word at all. She didn't say anything about Jews. She talked about the Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. has a lot of influence in Congress, and everybody knows that. And then he goes, oh, my God, political correctness prevents us from denouncing her. Well, no, it doesn't. Political correctness mandates denunciations of her. For what? for crossing the political correct line on Israel, and then invoking Jewish minority status as though that's what the conflict is about, when of course it's not about that at all. And so anyway, everyone's a hypocrite except you and me, dude.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think,
and by the way, Ilhan Omar didn't phrase her stuff very well, because she kind of just said everybody believes all this Israel stuff because they're paid to. Well, hey, Israeli lobby money has a hell of a lot to do with it. Let's settle for that. I don't think you have to completely dismiss that people believe the wrong thing. I mean, that's part of it, is we got to explain why it's not okay for the status quo to continue. And I think, and I bet Ilhan Omar would agree with me, that probably most Americans don't really understand about who's occupying who over there. And if anybody ever really drew them a map and showed them of what's happening to the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, et cetera, that they would then, have a much more informed opinion that would tilt much further away from the Israelis. And by the way, Grant F. Smith from the Institute for Research Middle Eastern Policy, he's been running all these polls lately, and the Google polling stuff has proven really accurate, and he's showing how the Gallup results don't measure up. They don't measure up with anybody else, any of the other companies, and they don't measure up with his results that he's getting off of his Google surveys and stuff, and that American support for Israel is already much more lukewarm. I mean, the people who are passionately attached, they certainly are. But for the rest of us, including many, like 1/3 of American Jews, say they feel no particular attachment to Israel whatsoever, which is hugely important, an important fact for a lot of different reasons to note. And so, but yeah. Yeah, I forgot how I was going to end that point, but it was something about Israel and Palestine is important.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one who forgets by the end of my rant what my point was.
It's been a long day already.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's another thing I was going to ask you, because we briefly talked about the OPEC Israel war that led to like the oil crisis and all this stuff, and there's all these points in history where our relationship with Israel is actually basically is a negative, has become a negative. And had some negative impacts on the U.S. And even with that said, I mean, we give them all this money. We're constantly getting involved in their conflicts. We're constantly, helping them with by giving them weapons and putting our military and our men in harm's way to help them out. What do you think? It's just it's AIPAC and just so much influence on our foreign policy and on our politicians, and they just have an incredibly strong lobbyists that really can influence stuff? Or are there people in the inside that really are just have that same ideology and want to just help push that? Why do we keep helping them? Like, we don't get anything in return? And there's a lot of people like myself who are just like, okay, why are we doing this? And then there's a lot of people on the other side that they just see them as an ally and never ask the question on why are they an ally? Why do we go to such extents to help this ally? And even if it means, spending our money, putting our men in harm's way and all this stuff, and in many cases, helping them commit war crimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that, in the democracy, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And the Zionist movement has been very organized and very, powerful and influential from the very beginning. And in fact, John Judas wrote a book, I guess 2 years ago, something like that, about Harry Truman and the recognition of Israel in the first place. And it was all about the Benjamins. It was the campaign donations that he was absolutely dependent on, or he was going to be a one-term president, was going to be embarrassed by Wilkie, need to do a train whistle-stop tour through the Midwest, and he needed some money to do it. And these, in fact, you got to read Philip Weiss at mondoweiss.net. He just had a great one the other day, too, where Jack Kennedy went and met with a room with, I guess everyone in there, they said, was an extremely powerful American Jewish Zionist, extremely wealthy, and that they would get behind him and they would help him in his election, but that the mandate in exchange was that he would turn Middle Eastern policy over to them, and that he just absolutely resented it too and took their help, but then, you know, tried to kind of rebel against that in a way too, that they just had such chutzpah, as they might have put it, about that. And then, you know, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee is just one of many organized Jewish and or Zionist groups in America that has such influence, and it is about the money, and it's about the organization, the stick-to-itiveness of the group too, where, you know, we have 435 congressmen, and they'll offer you some money. You want us to help you run? Yeah, we'll donate to you. You just have to agree to sign all our papers and stuff. If you don't, we're going to finance your primary opponent. And then if you don't, and you beat your primary opponent and you make it to the general, we're going to finance your opponent in the general. We're going to show you that there's only one way to play this game, and that is you're going to be our friend. And it's a tough game. They play hard ball, and they don't go away. I mean, they really operate like the left believes the NRA does, right? Where the NRA is just so powerful. They're really so powerful because they represent millions and millions and millions of Americans. You know, AIPAC, not so much. AIPAC is that powerful because they get the job done. And if you defeat their candidate 4 times in a row, they'll get you on the 5th. They will not let up. And they keep it going, and they answer the phone when they get calls on their telephone tree, and they forward the emails. They call their senators when they're supposed to call their senators. They work their asses off. And there are many different groups, organized Zionist groups in the United States who do simply tons of the work of democracy in a way that you and I don't want to do. And they do that. They work hard as hell, and they got a hell of a lot of money to do it with. And they're willing to break the law. They're willing to use extortion. They're willing to lie. They're willing to smear. They're willing to call any of their opponents a vicious anti-Semite, horrible, racist monster, and mercilessly attack their character until they're destroyed, you know, if they can. And, you should so they do cross the line. I want to give them credit for their participation in the American democratic process to the degree that it's legit. But at the same time, they don't ever register as foreign agents. They act as they're the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They're Americans, and they just like Israel a lot. And so they're not foreign agents. They're American agents who just want America to do whatever the Likud party in Israel wants them to do. And so it's like a loophole in the foreign agents, clauses. And they're influential coast to coast, you know. They're really powerful. And as I say, they're willing to break the law. Grant F. Smith is the best at this at the Institute for Research Middle Eastern Policy. He keeps track of their stuff, legal and illegal, and the various machinations that they get into to secure America's position here. To secure Israel's position in the American government. And they do. It's worth mentioning again. They shamelessly exploit the accusation of anti-Semitism against their opponents and use that as a shield and act as though they could just do, anything, do whatever they want, and pretend that no criticism against them is honest or legitimate or based in a reasoned adult argument. No, anyone who opposes them simply wakes up in the morning hating Jews and wanting to see them all pushed into the sea. And so there's nothing even to be discussed. And anyone who would dare disagree with them is already beyond the pale of even discussing any other thing too, right? You wouldn't ask a Klansman what his opinion is about baseball or anything. Once you're a Klansman, we don't care what you think about nothing. Well, everyone who opposes them might as well be the Klan. And is now just an illegitimate person in public life from now on. If they can get away with that level of smear, they'll do it. They'll try it. And you should see this, man, if you haven't seen it. It's at electronicintifada.net, which is a guy named Ali Abu Nima who does really great journalism over there. And what it is it's a suppressed documentary that was done by Al Jazeera. And was meant to air on American TV and was suppressed. And what happened was the Israelis went to Qatar, which runs Al Jazeera America, and they told Al Jazeera, you have to suppress this. And they did. They suppressed it, and it stayed suppressed for like a year or something. And finally it leaked. It's on YouTube, and you can find it at electronicintifada.net. It's called The Lobby USA. The Lobby USA at electronicintifada.net. 4-part thing. You got to watch all 4 parts of it too, and it'll blow your mind from beginning. I'm not saying wait till the good stuff in part 4. I'm saying the whole thing will blow your mind. And what it is, and you might think, oh, Al Jazeera, that sounds like an Arab with an axe to grind, and so I don't want to hear that. But that's not what it is. I'll tell you what it is. It's a white British Jew who went in as an undercover reporter. And this is the best. This is the highest level undercover reporter, hidden camera, gotcha. I don't mean gotcha in a cheap way, but I got your ass kind of gotcha journalism you've ever seen in your life, man. It is absolutely spectacular. This guy smuggled a camera and a microphone into dozens of meetings with some of the most powerful and influential people in the Israel lobby, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and AIPAC and the Israel Project and these other things. And it is just bananas, man. It is just the most incredible thing. And in fact, so if we were talking about a scandal in labor in the shoe industry or some random thing, the persecution of the dolphins of the whatever island chain, anything, this level of undercover camera, secret infiltration journalism that this guy did, it's not like he just met with these people. He was working for them for months, and all for journalism, for pure, true, diamond clear journalism, man. The best kind. It's just great. I wish I knew the guy's name so I could say the name of the guy that really did the work. And it is just, and man, it'll disgust you too. To think that any foreign government has this much influence over what Americans are allowed to say about them. I mean, it's just crazy. It's just completely out of control. Yeah, you'll love it. You'll love it. I promise. It's called The Lobby USA.
Yeah, it's so on my YouTube channel where I post.
I should have known. Everything I just said just now was for your audience if they haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say on my YouTube channel, I have a playlist where I put documentaries. So anytime there's any good documentaries on YouTube that, people are looking for something to watch, I figured, that's how I got into a lot of this stuff.
That's great.
I got obsessed with documentaries. So I would just constantly put some documentaries in there. I don't agree with all of them. I don't, they're just food for thought, some just thought-provoking stuff. And anything that I think is worth watching, I put in there. And I actually do have The Lobby in there. So if you guys are listening on my YouTube channel, just go to documentaries, and I have all 4 parts. Unfortunately, I haven't got through all 4 parts yet. I'm still in the process of watching it. But same reason, I think I might have even heard of it. I don't know if I heard of it. If it was Max Blumenthal who talked about it, or you talked about it on your show. But I definitely think, or maybe it was Max on your show talking about it. But I definitely, I think that I might have heard you talk about it in the past, and that's probably why I looked for it in the first place. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing how little, there hasn't been great work like this, really showing just this level of journalism to show how much influence they have. And I know people, like you said, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I know people see the name Al Jazeera and they think, oh, they're obviously biased, and they have this they already have an opinion that they're trying to push on you, and all that stuff. But I make that argument all the time that, yeah, somebody might have an agenda, or somebody might have a opinion that they're pushing, but it doesn't mean that all their information should be completely disregarded. Sometimes I read stuff on a website that I disagree with maybe a lot of the time, but they might have actually uncovered something interesting, not because they have these moral and noble reasons to uncover that, but maybe because they only hate the other person that they're trying to throw under the bus. But whatever the reason may be, it still means that they uncovered some good information. So,
Right.
sometimes I think it's really easy for people to just be like, oh, because I'm sure you've done it where you're just like, you're like, oh, watch this or read that, and like, oh, screw that journalist, he's a lefty, or screw that guy, he's a this or he's a whatever, and it's like, well, can we just talk about the information that I'm referring to? Like, is this correct or incorrect?
Yeah.
Is this true?
The best example of that was when the Americans were plotting a coup in Ukraine in early 2014, and it is obviously the Russians. I have no proof of that, but I don't think anyone disbelieves that it was the Russians that intercepted the Americans' phone call plotting a coup.
Yeah.
And then put it on YouTube. And so now I'm supposed to be mad at the Russians for posting that? Or like, I'll tell you, my honest reaction even right now remembering it is my shoulders shrug. Hey, thanks Russia for the leak. I don't really I don't care at all who the source is at all.
Well, that's
all I care is we needed to hear that. And then, of course, the punchline is they went ahead and did the coup anyway. And it happened just like in the leaked phone call. It was just they did it anyway. But still, it could have been stopped. And so and then but like, is that supposed to be not newsworthy because the evil Vladimir Putin was the one who put it on YouTube? It's completely irrelevant. What matters is the facts of the story. Were they true or not? And Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan's wife, she admitted that every word of it was true. She didn't claim that it was edited deceitfully or anything. It obviously wasn't. It was the whole conversation.
Well, that's if you guys haven't heard that, please look it up. Victoria, you can actually hear them talking about, basically influencing Ukraine's politics. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's not like some. A lot of times people would say, oh, well, we think the U.S. is doing this. We think they're having influence here. Like, they're literally just out and open talking about it. And like you said, does it matter who released it? It's same thing with the Hillary emails bullshit. It's like, oh, well, WikiLeaks, this and that. Who gives a shit? Did anybody ever say that the emails were fake or they were lies or they were, they were tampered with? No. Right. It's like, so does it matter, what incentive people had to do it or maybe what reason they exposed them or whatnot? Like, none of that stuff is really that important. Like, the fact is that like it still exposed some stuff and that's important. And in fact,
you know what? You remember the story a few weeks back where the BuzzFeed journalist claimed that Michael Cohen had testified that Trump told him to lie and obstructed justice. And then it was the big scoop and the media ran with it for 2 days and then or a whole day anyway. And then it was debunked that night. Well, that same reporter, Jason Leopold, who, was going after Trump so hard that he got it way wrong, got out over his skis and blew that one. Well, he's the same guy who spent the whole spring of 2016 or I guess the whole year of 2016 and into 2017 suing the government and forcing them to release Hillary Clinton's emails. So he released more, got under FOIA, got probably, I don't know exactly the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that he had gotten more Hillary Clinton emails released than WikiLeaks ever got. And that from the DNC and whatever. These were State Department stuff, and they were ones that made her look absolutely terrible because it's Max Blumenthal's father, Sidney Blumenthal, who helped monger the war and convince her to do it, is also then when the war starts, he explains to her that, our jihadist friends that we're supporting are starting to round up and murder blacks just for being black. Be careful because we could get in trouble with this here and stuff like that. It's right there in there. So that proves that she's a horrible, evil, vile monster. And it was Jason Leopold, the anti-Trump crusading reporter, was the one who leaked that. So does that mean that his journalism that got her emails released was good, but whoever it was, and I don't even believe it was the Russians at all, but who knows? But whoever it was that leaked this stuff to WikiLeaks, that those emails are beyond the pale somehow. I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. Of course, underlying the whole argument is their claim that you don't have the right to know this stuff. I don't agree with that. I think, of course, we all had the right to know what's in all of those emails, no matter who leaked them, of course.
Yeah, I mean, when Hillary and Trump were running, I mean, I watched plenty of documentaries on Hillary and read plenty of articles bashing Hillary, and I read plenty of articles bashing Trump, and because I wanted to uncover the truth, trying to get a better understanding of who they were, and it doesn't matter who wrote them to me. I mean, obviously you have to take it in consideration that, okay, maybe this person is a little biased or whatnot. But if the information happens to be true, then I shouldn't let who wrote it blur my I guess my perspective on the information, or make me more skeptical on the information just because I think, oh, this person has an agenda. And I mean, and a lot of good work is done because people have an agenda. I mean, there's people who are truly left leaning and, you know, maybe exposing some corruption on the right because of their hatred for the right, and people on the right exposing some corruption on the left because their hatred towards them. So it's not always a bad thing. I mean, in some cases, sometimes it gives you motivation to kind of expose the other side. I think it becomes the issue when you basically can't see the corruption on your side, and I think that's when it becomes an issue. You know, when you just happen to, you know, you're either for Trump or anti-Trump, there's no in between. You know, everything he does is for some greater plan, and we don't understand it quite yet, and this and that, and he really does want to end the war, but there's a deep state not letting him, and all this stuff, or he's the worst person ever, you know, but yet the people who are saying he's the worst person ever completely gave Obama a pass for, you know, the 8 years he was in office. So I think it's a huge issue, and you know, you brought up you know, Ukraine, and you know, I brought up Max Blumenthal. You know, a great interview you did with him not too long ago was about what's going on in Ukraine, and you know, you hear people talk about this, but apparently, you know, from listening to your show, I realize it's much bigger of an issue than I thought. Like all the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, it's just it's insane. I thought like maybe it was a small group, maybe, you know, but it sounds like the U.S. was actually backing a bunch of neo-Nazis that are becoming a legitimate threat or a legitimate group with some type of influence there. Is that accurate to say?
It is. It's a big deal. In fact, you know, it's funny. At the end of the Soviet Union, when it was all falling apart, George Bush Sr. and James Baker tried to preserve it. They wanted the Cold War to end, but they didn't want the Soviet Union to finally dissolve. And so, you know, there were the Warsaw Pact states who, they were all Soviet satellites and under Kremlin control. But then there were the so-called republics that were really members of the official USSR. And so that included the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine. And I'm not sure if it included any of the stands in Asia, off the top of my head. But anyway, George Bush Sr. went to Kiev, and he gave a speech saying, hey, let's not let suicidal nationalism and, you know, kind of reactionary politics cause a real problem here. He was sort of warning them that at the time that if you insist on separation from Russia, that he was, I guess, predicting violence by Russia, that they wouldn't tolerate that. And he was letting them know that America's not going to back you up. You're way too far from where we are that for us to, you know, and we don't want to. We're not going to. And so William Safire, the hawkish writer for the New York Times, called this the Chicken Kiev speech, where, pardon me, George H.W. Bush was so afraid of right-wing Ukrainian nationalism and anti-Russian sentiment and what they might do, that he was even willing to try to help preserve the USSR, to contain it. And then that, of course, in hindsight, looks foolish and makes him look horrible, that here the USSR is trying to cease to exist and H.W. Bush is trying to save the thing. Jeez, you know. However, the real moral of the story for our purposes here is that H.W. Bush, he knew a thing or two about Ukrainian politics. You know, the CIA had backed those Nazis for many years. The Banderists who had fought for the Nazi SS and you know, massacred civilians in the tens or hundreds of thousands, Jews and Poles during the Holocaust in the Galatian SS there. And then their descendants, their sons and whoever, they were Cold War assets from time to time. I don't know how continuous it all was. But they were Cold War assets of the CIA. So Bush Sr., former director of the CIA, knew a bit about that. And anyway, so that's a little bit of the backdrop. Then you really have a situation where back during communism, I guess to go back further even, I'm not sure if this is still your same question you asked that I'm answering, but to go back further, when the communists committed their genocide in the 1930s in Ukraine, the Holodomor, where Stalin just stole all their wheat to feed everybody else because his programs were destroying all the crops everywhere else. So here was the last place left with wheat, so he stole it, and all the Ukrainians died. And then he also, I guess this would have been maybe post-war, I'm not exactly sure the timing on all of this, but I guess post-war, he moved a bunch of, in a deliberate relocation program, he moved a bunch of ethnic Russians into eastern Ukraine, and he built an industrial base there in the Donbass region. And they outlawed the Ukrainian language and forced everyone to speak Russian. And so, part of what's happened post-Cold War is and post-independence of Ukraine, contains some backlash against those politics from back then. For example, and this goes right to the heart of the coup. In the fall of 2013, the Russian-leaning elected president, Yanukovych, he was going to sign a deal with the European Union, a trade deal with the European Union. And then when he got there, and he was really from the East, and he was supported by those Russian-speaking people of the East. But he did win the election overall, and which is, part of the pitfalls of democracy, majority rules and that kind of thing, or at least majority vote this time rules. But so this was in November of 2013. The Americans, really the Germans, on at the behest of the Americans, changed the deal. And changed it to one that he couldn't accept. He said, I feel like I'm a bride who showed up at her wedding. And it's a pretty funny joke. I mean, to hear a male president say that, right? I feel like a bride who showed up at her wedding to be confronted with a prenuptial agreement. And so I'm not so sure about this whole thing. I think I want to just go home. But the thing was that they were doing was they were demanding all these concessions and all this privatization of the economy, quote unquote privatization, contracting out to American, interests and that kind of thing, taking over. And they would have to make all these cuts in their social programs in the name of austerity. And then they could borrow $15 billion. Well, and they would have to, it would be against the deal to have another trade deal with the Russians. And the Russians were offering, hey, you can have a deal with us, and we don't care if you have a deal with the EU. You can have a deal with both as far as we're concerned, and we'll give you $15 billion. I think those numbers aren't exactly right. Maybe it was we'll give you 5 or something like that, but it was no strings attached. And then so that was what precipitated the crisis. And a big part of why the parties in the East and the people in the East were against the trade deal with the EU was because they have this legacy old economy built by the Soviet Union back then, and these old factories and this kind of thing, which can sort of sputter along for the time being currently, however, or at least then. However, in no way could they compete with the massive economies of scale and high-tech production techniques and everything else, capital and management and everything in the West. And so EU prices were going to completely destroy all of those industries in the East among those Russian-speaking people. They already felt really kind of separate anyway. And so they had this huge incentive to be against that policy and against those who were trying to push it on them. It was going to completely bankrupt them. And so, as I was saying, that's kind of a legacy of those people being moved there by Stalin back in the days of communism and all that. Well, so the people in the in the West, including the Nazi groups that you mentioned, they wanted the deal, and certainly they didn't want to deal with Russia. They wanted to move further away from Russia, and I don't know exactly all of the Nazis' opinion, but essentially the consensus on the Western side was that they wanted to join with Europe and wanted to be, not Russian Slavic civilization tied to the East, but a new modern, so-called EU country moving west. And So that was the basis of the big protest movement, which led to the coup of February 21st, 2014. And this was just, again, 2 weeks after the phone call was leaked, where Robert Kagan's wife is plotting the whole thing. People might remember F the EU. She got in big trouble. Oh, my God, can you believe an American diplomat said F the EU? But then that was it. It was like that was the point of the story. And that was, you might even think that was why Russia leaked it. It was just to embarrass her for using the F word, right? When in fact, if you listen to the thing, it's her plotting a coup. And the reason she says F the EU is she's saying they're taking too long to implement the coup. And I say we just go around them and implement it our damn selves. That is what is being said there. Nice distraction with your little curse word. But anyway, so then that led to that coup, and then immediately the people of the East refused to recognize the new coup d'etat junta. And it was a bunch of Nazis who helped to overthrow that government, caused the riots, and rode the previous government out of town. And so, and then the first thing they did was try to pass laws outlawing Russian as a second language and or as an official language of the state, and making threats about seizing the Crimean Peninsula and kicking the Russians off of the Crimean Peninsula, where they maintained their naval base there at Sevastopol. And so then the rebels, so-called rebels in the East, said, we're not going to recognize the new government. They occupied all the government buildings in the East. And then the new coup d'etat junta sent the Nazis and, militias and Nazi militias and some National Guard types to start a war against them. Thousands of people were killed in 2014 and 15 in the fighting in the East. And then, of course, the Russians seized the Crimean Peninsula without killing anyone at all, by the way. And they didn't invade from Russia. They just left their base that they already had there. They've had there since the days before George Washington was president in the 1780s, when America was under the Articles of Confederation, was when Catherine the Great bought the Crimean Peninsula from the Ottoman Empire. And, it had only, quote unquote, belonged to Ukraine since the 50s, when the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the drunken Khrushchev, gifted it to them in the middle of the night one night, and I guess as a reward for helping his rise to power after Stalin had died. But it didn't matter. It didn't mean anything. It was like a cosmetic difference because everybody was only answerable to the Kremlin anyway. And so it didn't really belong to Ukraine in any real sense. It never had, and it still didn't. And then after the end of the Cold War, Ukraine held on to it, and the Russians, I guess they were pretty weakened at that point and weren't in much of a position to complain about it. So they said, look, just let us keep our base there, and you can have it. It's fine. They agreed to that. But it was only when, after the coup, when the new Nazi-backed junta threatened to kick them off of there, was when they finally seized the thing and said, well, it belongs to us anyway, which essentially it did, as far as that goes. And then they, all the poll results said that the referendum was legit, that the super majority or more of the people of the Crimean Peninsula wanted to join the Russian Federation, didn't consider themselves Ukrainians in the first place. So much for that narrative, about Crimea. I mean, Ray McGovern told the story of going to a church. I guess he was giving a speech or something, and all the kids in Sunday school were making war propaganda, denouncing Putin for his evil invasion of Crimea. Like, who knows where they get this stuff, man? I don't know where they get this stuff. But Ray McGovern says to the teacher at the church that, how many people do you think died in the Russian invasion of Crimea? And she says, oh, I don't know. Hundreds, thousands? And he says, would you believe nobody at all? Not one person was killed, lady. You sure you know what you're doing teaching these kids to do this stuff? This is crazy, But and then ever since then, these Nazi groups have been a problem. There's the Social Nationalist Party. They now call themselves Svoboda, which means truth, but they're the social nationalists. Not that they're Nazis, that's National Socialists. So you see right there. Although here's a picture of their leader with a Hitler salute, so much for that. And in all of the group members too, and all their Nazi regalia and statements and the rest of it. And then there's the right sector, and the Azov battalion was like, I guess, kind of the umbrella group as they were fighting in the East. And there are plenty of quotes and plenty of documentation. It's no conspiracy, no fringe take at all. It's a fringe take in the sense of who was willing to contradict the official narrative at the beginning, if that's what you mean. But at the same time, there's a guy named I forgot his name, Gonkin, who just wrote a thing for Forbes all about this the other day. You can read about it in The Nation, and you can read extremely credible and great, mainstream enough for your tastes journalists writing about this stuff and in depth about who these guys are and what they do and the murders that they've committed against the people of the East and their avowed hatred of Jews and whoever they consider to be outsiders, their repeated threats to overthrow the government at any time. We did it before, we can do it again if you don't do what we say, kind of holding the whole showpiece elected government hostage from outside. And I don't know. I'll tell you what, though, and I have no idea if this is really true, but I read an article that said that the leader in the current polls there, I mean, people hate their government there. Man, you think you and me hate George Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump. That's nothing to the level of contempt for the level of corruption of the leadership in Ukrainian politics. It's just beyond belief. And currently, I read a story that said that the leader in the polls for the upcoming presidential election is a Jewish guy who's an actor who plays the president in a sitcom on TV. And in the sitcom, he's a gym coach or something who, by wacky circumstance, ends up becoming the president. And right now he decided, well, what the hell? I'll just go ahead and run for president, and he's in the lead. And he may be the country's best hope at this point. I have no idea what's going to happen. But I'll tell you what, though, it should be meaningful and important and remembered for history that Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States, if you don't count Calvin Coolidge, because, but that he installed Nazis and their friends in power. I mean, the current, I should have said this part, the current speaker of the parliament there is Andre Perubi, who's one of the leaders of the Social Nationalist Party. That's who America's helped to put in power there. And Barack Obama did it. And it's like comic book unbelievable, right? Just like as I mentioned in Libya, the pogroms against blacks. There's a town called Tawerga in Libya that was primarily populated by black migrant workers from sub-Saharan Africa. And when Hillary Clinton's jihadist terrorists came to town, they just ran them all off, mass rapes and murders, and they ethnically, quote unquote, cleansed the city. And the women, and I knew this great reporter left over from Iraq War II, and I still knew the guy. His name's David Enders, at that time writing for McClatchy newspapers, who he went to the refugee camps and talked to these women about how the jihadis would come every night and gang rape them and all of this stuff. And, these were America's good guys, were the ones who were behind all of this stuff. That was Barack Obama essentially acting as the grand wizard dragon of the Libyan KKK. That was, spreading these ridiculous rumors that anyone who's in Libya and is black must be an armed, paid mercenary for Muammar Gaddafi, the enemy. And so fair game on them and their family and whoever, which is just ridiculous, right? You might as well blame everyone in Tulsa, Oklahoma for everything I ever did wrong. Just don't mean a thing. Just made up. And you can find even pictures of where from Russia Today had the footage, and no one disputed at the time. It was legit news about where blacks had been rounded up and were being held in cages at the zoo, and were bound and were being force-fed Libyan flags, and were gagging and choking, and maybe some of them were dying, being having Libyan flags forced down their throat as they're being held in cages at the zoo. Libya, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's jihadists there. And that should be part of his legacy. That, when it comes to racial stuff, George W. Bush killed a lot of people, and I guess he did empower a lot of Sunni and Shia sort of supremacist type groups in a way. But just seems really notable that it was anti-black group, or I guess different anti-black groups of racists in Libya, and then literal Hitler-loving Nazis and grandsons of literal Hitler-obeying Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, you couldn't make that up. If I told you, no matter how much you hate Obama, I promise you that by the end of his term, he's going to, put Nazis in power in Ukraine, you'd have been like, no, he's going to put the Black Panthers in power in Chicago. But you would have never believed me if I told you he's going to put Nazis in power in Ukraine. And yet here we are. And then, at least then he was afraid to arm them. Trump came into power. It's supposedly the Russian agent. And what's the first thing he does? He starts selling arms to the Ukrainians, which is a really bad and dangerous move, and puts them in the position of feeling, confidence that we wish that they did not have about how they might fare in a fight against the Russians, which is bad game theory from here.
Yeah, I think that tells you something about this whole chess game that they play, that it doesn't matter if, what the ideology is. It doesn't matter what country, what religion, any of that stuff. I mean, it's all about money and power, and anything that helps them get more of both, they'll do. And if that means backing Nazis, if that means helping, terrorists, whatever it may be, it's really kind of similar to just looking at everything like I guess a CEO of a company. If you're just looking at the bottom line and you're looking at how do I make quarterly gains, and how do I keep growing this company, how do I keep growing this empire, and if that means harming innocent people, if that means lying, if that means whatever it may be, I'll do it. And it's, a lot of times we think that people are motivated by ideology or religion or whatever it may be, and I think in some cases they are. But I think at the end of the day, if they have a goal, if they want to, if supporting somebody they don't agree with will help expand their empire, they're going to do it. And they're not going to care that they're going to have different ideologies, and they're not going to care who they harm or what in the long run, what harm it may do. So it's interesting, because like you said, just saying it out loud sounds cartoonish. I mean, it sounds insane to think that America's first black president would have any link to neo-Nazis anywhere in the world and helping them out. So it's pretty fucking crazy. But yeah, Scott, I mean, I think we covered a lot today. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, because there's so much going on in the world constantly, and you're so well researched, and I just love hearing your perspectives on all this stuff. But actually, before I let you go, one thing, talking about skateboarding, because I think last time you were on, we actually briefly talked about skateboarding, because we both used to skateboard back in the day. And
I still ride sometimes.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I'm not
awesome.
that good, but I still skateboard.
Yeah, it's funny, because like my kid's at that age where I'm like, oh, maybe I can get him, on a skateboard, and he's 4 now, and I'm like, maybe I can start getting him on a skateboard. I'm like, maybe I'll start skateboarding again, and then just the other day I was at the store, and I'm like, hey, I grabbed my son, I'm like, hey, my dad used to ride one of these, and I got on it. And I'm like, holy shit! I'm like, it would take me a little bit to kind of get my touch back, because
start skating again, man. You should. Yeah, you owe it to yourself to skateboard.
Well, it's relaxing. It's therapy. It's to me, it was like,
especially you got a little boy, man. Just bring him in tow with you and raise him that way. This is the skate park. This is where we stand still and ride around really fast.
Yeah, and it's fun. I mean, there's something to it in regards to just kind of sparking creativity and imagination. I was always really I love music growing up. I love drawing, art.
And look at it from your kid's point of view. Think about how rad that is to just, oh yeah, I've always skateboarded since I was 3 or something. My dad always just took me. That's the luckiest thing a boy could say.
Good point, yeah. Because I wish I started skateboarding sooner. I don't know how old you were when you started, but I was kind of late in life, So I'm like, fuck, man. There's people who were skateboarding for years when I started, and they just, there's something about learning at a young age that kids kind of pick things up so quickly when they're young, and you just can't make up for that later in life. It's hard to ever catch up to those people who have years.
On the other hand, for people who did ride when they were young, if they pick it up 30 years later, they're good again. I've seen it. I've seen people who, you know, they started having kids right out of high school or whatever and hadn't picked up a skateboard since then. And then, nope, blam, they're right back at it. Watch my Smith grind. Hell yeah.
Yeah, that's
as long as you're willing to go for it.
It's funny because my niece, she's like, I think she's 14. I hope she's not listening. She probably isn't. And but I think she's like 14, and she's wearing like, you know, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like this whole like wearing Thrasher clothes again is like cool. And I'm like, Emma, do you know what Thrasher is? She's like, no. And I'm like, why are you wearing that? You know, and like everybody's wearing like a Vans again.
That's
and
funny.
These Thrasher. Have you seen this trend? Like it's a huge trend now where like all these people are wearing like Thrasher shirts and like these you know, these old school, you know, the old.
What's funny about that, right, is that, you know, Thrasher really represents dudes that never did sell out. You know what I mean? Fausto and the whole NHS industries, indie trucks and thrash and all that. They kept it hardcore this whole time, and yet they're like kind of sell out by default. They can't even help it. People just like that brand and want to turn it into a trend anyway. Which I mean, I guess that's why people like it. But for those of us who are skateboarders, there's always been, you know, whatever. Quicksilver was always after the shopping mall market, right? But Thrasher is really more hardcore, by us, for us kind of a thing. So it's not like Vision Streetwear. Well, you're too young for that probably. When I was a kid, everybody had Vision Streetwear all over the place. And at least that really was sort of cheesy mall brand, you know, over the top kind of deal. That really was made for that. Whereas Thrasher Magazine, it's a magazine. It's not a clothing brand. You know what I mean? They have their logo on shirts, but it's not like they are, you know, make skate clothes. They don't.
Yeah, you know? No, they didn't. Yeah.
And, no, it's a magazine. And by the way, the editor, Jake Phelps, just died. Really? So I guess we'll see what happens over there. Although, you know, the last I heard, the managing editor, art director is a skater I used to know a long time ago. I don't know if he even remembers me anymore, but it was an Austin guy. Who I don't know if he's going to be the new editor or not, but I'd be happy if he was. You know, Thrash would be safe in his hands, so I guess we'll see what happens.
Remember that VHS magazine, skate magazine? What was it called? Like Ford? What was it? Ford? It was like I remember getting them like every month, and it was just like basically.
Oh, 411, the videos.
Yeah,
in the 90s.
Yeah,
great stuff in there, man.
Yeah, I used to love that shit. It was just you watching all these just amazing skateboarders all over the, you know, cities all over the U.S. doing crazy shit, and yeah, I used to love that stuff. It was just, you know, it was kind of like a VHS monthly magazine. And
where do you live?
I live in Ludlow, which is right. It's, you know, Springfield, Massachusetts, where the basketball fame is and stuff. It's like a little like suburb right out of, you know, not too far from Springfield, Massachusetts.
I see. Okay, I don't know anything about your scene up there. I was gonna say, if you're from around here anywhere, man, you got a vert ramp, my friend's backyard.
Well, yeah. Well, we've been talking about, my buddies and I. We've been talking about, you know, we like to do these guy trips, and once in a while we all get together and we'll do a little trip and just go somewhere different. And you know, one place we've been kind of brainstorming for a while is Texas, because I have a friend from San Antonio, a friend of mine, Carlos, and I have a couple other friends that have been there. Went to Austin, went to a couple other places, and loved it. And cool. So, you know, and so there's a
lot of great concrete parks here now, man. I haven't skated 1% of them, actually, man. I mean, there's tons of them.
Well, yeah, and then the people, and you know, I'm also a whiskey drinker, and so I mean, a lot of the places in the South I wouldn't mind going and trying to, you know, just I don't know, I like the lifestyle, you know, being Portuguese and going back to Europe. I feel like, you know, I tell myself, like, these guys, they kind of figured it out. I mean, you can kind of criticize them for not working quite as hard or you know, being you know, some of these countries being socialist, but a lot of these people here, they're just way more focused with doing the things they enjoy, and they want to spend much less time doing the things they have to do. And then you go to the South and you're like, you know what, America has some of that too. You know, it's just the East Coast, and that's kind of fucking crazy. But you go to the South and there's still a lot of chill people who enjoy conversation and enjoy, you know, will take the time to talk and relax.
Well, Texas is different. Texas isn't the South. Texas is its own region too.
Yeah.
And I admit that I'm a real workaholic. I have to force myself to get away to do anything but work any day of the week, you know, but
But it counts what you call work, right? You're doing something you're passionate about, something. So it's like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't consider that work. When I say work, I think it's people do.
Yeah, having a jab you got to do. I know it.
Yeah.
I've been there, believe me.
Oh yeah. Well, I do it full time. So, it reminds me of why it's so important to keep doing things you enjoy, because I mean, to me, it's like things like this is therapy, and it also reminds me that there's much more going on in the world, and much more important things than just going to work and taking care of your priorities, because I think it's really easy to get stuck in that grind and forget that there's all this other stuff going on. And
for real, I mean, if you live on Twitter, you might think that a race war is going to break out any minute now or something, but then you go outside and everything's fine. In real life, it's not like that at all.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it was Joe Rogan or somebody who they made the point that you hear people screaming and yelling and in cars, all this rage, road rage, or you see somebody getting in all these heated arguments on Twitter. But when you see places where people are in person, like in line at Starbucks or at in line at a concert or whatever, people are usually generally nice. And there is something about, we talked about earlier about being disconnected to things. I think there's something about, when you're online or, you're tweeting or whatever, you're kind of disconnected that's a human being, and a human being that you might actually get along with and like if you actually spend some time with them. So I think it's really easy to just, like you said, go online and think that everybody hates each other. And then you go out to the real world and you're surrounded by humans who are getting along, and you're like, oh shit, maybe things aren't at the edge of breaking any moment now, So, but yeah, it's interesting how many people with different perspectives and ideologies, if you actually spend some time together. I mean, most of my friends, we don't come from similar backgrounds. We don't have similar philosophies on a lot of things, but we all enjoy having conversations, and we still consider each other friends and enjoy hanging out with one another. So I don't think you should, break friendships or dislike anybody just because of your differences. If anything, I think it's to me, conversations with people I completely agree with on everything are quite boring. I enjoy talking to people that might have a different opinion, because I want my ideas to be challenged, so I can kind of reevaluate my own ideas and see if maybe I should rethink things. So
yeah. The question is, do you want to feel like you're right now, or do you want to really be right from here on out?
Good point. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. There is something about that ego, man. That ego gets in the way, where it's like, even if somebody makes a good point, because everything's a pissing contest, and it's always like, well, I can't let them know that they made a good point, so I have to discard that point and pretend that I have a better point. It's just, everything becomes this debate, and instead of just, if your true purpose is trying to figure things out and get to, I guess, for lack of a better term, to the truth, then I think when you're wrong on something, or you find out that somebody is right on something, then I think that only leads you one step closer to getting to that truth, and that should be a good thing. So yep. You're absolutely right. Well, I won't take up any more of your time, because I know you're super busy, and now with your internet working, you probably have a lot of shit you gotta catch up on.
You have no idea.
But thanks a lot, Scott. It's always a pleasure talking. I really appreciate your time, and keep up the great work. I hope there's tons of people like myself who are huge fans and really appreciate the passion that you put into all your interviews and all your articles and all your books and all your work. I think the reason why people like myself are huge fans is because you can really sense the passion in what you're doing, and we really believe that your heart's in the right place and trying to be anti-war and hopefully leave the earth a little better than we received it. So I think we're all trying to create our own little ripple effect.
Cool, man. Well, thanks very much. I'm happy to do it anytime, Ricardo. Have a good one, dude.
Hey, you too. Thanks. Take care.
Believe in the ripple effect.